Hey, your name, what's up? Oh, I look different from how I normally do? Well, yeah, I'm not judging today, I'm playing. What do you mean, do I still even play? Of course I do. Well, actually, let's talk about that. Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and today is this month's patron pick. If you like content like this, please be sure to join me in thanking my wonderful supporters on Patreon because there is approximately a 0% chance that I would make an episode like this if it wasn't being directly asked for. A little over 2 years ago, I published a video called Judge Dave's Origin Story, where I talked about how I got into magic and judging. And I closed out that video by mentioning that all the reasons that I originally wanted to play had gone away for one reason or another. Today's episode is a little bit of a continuation on that. I'll be talking about how I engage with the game now and what my current motivations are. Ready? Let's get started. My motivation for getting into magic was pretty simple: peer pressure. My friend wanted me to try the game, so I gave it a try. The very first games of Magic that I played on a regular basis were in the back room of a putt-putt every week with a group of friends that one of my Magic playing friends from school introduced me to. This is before EDH was invented, so we played multiplayer free-for-all with 60-card, 4 of having decks. We didn't have any specific band list or power level, but the political dynamics were similar to what you would find at a normal multiplayer table. So if someone looked like they were too far ahead, everyone else would band together to bring them back down. When I started playing Magic, one of my cousins who previously played the game sent me all of his bulk that he had left over after he quit. I spent hours poring over this nearly full 5,000 count long box, carefully crafting my first deck. To give you an idea about the power level, I remember the first deck that I had success with was a Pestilence deck, focused around stalling with Wall of Bone or Wall of Souls, getting a life lead with a card like Consume Spirit or Siphon Soul, and then burning everyone out. I was aware of the existence of Withering Wisps, basically a strict upgrade, but the card availability was a lot more challenging of an obstacle at that time, so I never got one. I remember being especially hyped when a store in my area had a Cemetery Gates that I could use to upgrade my deck. Now, as janky as it seemed, that deck actually had a lot of good points going for it. In an environment where 5 to 6 opponents was the norm, Pestilence and Siphon Soul scaling in effectiveness with the number of players was huge. And the relatively passive Wall Backbone did a great job stalling until the endgame in a non-threatening way. I flirted with Splash and Green for the combo with Rite of Passage, but with Pestilence and Consume Spirit it was important to be able to tap all my lands for black, and dual lands, especially enemy-colored dual lands, were not as prevalent as they are now. Eventually, I started wanting to check out more organized events, and I started going to pre-releases. I learned about these via the Wizards website, which I had gotten in the habit of checking every day. Now, at this time in Magic's history, pre-releases were large-scale events akin to a Grand Prix. Each state in the USA only had one. For my international viewers who were playing at that time, I'd be interested to know how they were distributed in your area. Big shout out to my parents for driving me down to Indy so I could play in these. From players at the pre-release, I learned about F&M, and I found a store in my town that had them. This is before Modern and Pioneer were invented, so most stores running F&Ms did Standard. The first Standard deck that I played was called Tooth and Nail. Basically, the game plan was to ramp into the titular 9-mana sorcery, and then win the game with some creatures. Now, this wasn't the best deck at the time. That was Affinity, the deck so broken it resulted in the first bans in Standard in around a decade. But Tooth and Nail was solidly number 2, and I had fun playing with it. I actually had a lot of fun playing F&Ms, and for years that was the main way that I played Magic. Standard format F&Ms at my local game store. I also tried out a few GPs whenever they came my way. And then I went to college. I started out wanting to do exactly the same thing in a different city. In fact, I remember one of the first things that I did when I got to Purdue was look up where I could play some Magic. There was just one small problem. As a freshman, I was not eligible for a parking pass, so that means I didn't have a car. The nearest game store was around 3 miles away by foot. Now, after a few weeks of making this trek, I was wondering if maybe there was another way. Fortunately, there was. Now, if you're not in the USA, Purdue is one of the top engineering colleges in the country, and one thing about engineering colleges is that they tend to have a lot of Magic players. Darn near everybody that I met either played Magic or had played in the past. One time I was hanging out with some friends in one of our dorm rooms, and the topic came up. A lot of people indicated they'd be interested in playing, but not many of them had decks. I proposed that we could buy a box and hold a draft, and so the next week, that's exactly what we did. It was a lot of fun. Afterwards, I suggested that maybe we could do it again sometime. As word of mouth spread, the draft club grew. At our height, we regularly had 30 players each week, drafting with 3 to 4 pods, and then having a second draft after that with a single pod. I continued organizing drafts through all 4 years of college, with the exception of about 6 months in my junior year. In retrospect, this was my first experience with judging. From the very beginning of my Magic career, I had a great interest in the rules, and within about the first year maybe, I would say that I probably got to a point where I had above average rules knowledge. But this was the first time that I got experience with the organizing, logistics, and community leadership skills that I would later use in my career as a judge. Ironically, at the time, I didn't consider what I was doing judging, and in fact had no interest at all in becoming a judge. I saw it more as an extension of playing, since it came out of my desire to get more games. Now, I mentioned that I had a period of about 6 months where I wasn't organizing Magic events at Purdue. What happened then? Well, that was the semester that I studied abroad. And do you want to know what I did my very first weekend in China? I spent a few hours exploring Shanghai by myself, trying to find a game store where I could play F&M. And I found one. It was a little disappointing that the F&M promos weren't printed in Chinese, but I played there every week until the middle of the semester when I moved across town to a different campus, at which point I did exactly the same thing. The second time, I found a place that I don't even think it was a real official game store. It was just a group of people organizing weekly games the same as I did back home. Now, at a time when everything in my surroundings was totally foreign in a very literal sense of the word, Magic was one of the familiar things that I used to help center myself. Although my Chinese language skills were severely lacking, I was still able to play. This is before every Magic card had 2,000 to 3,000 variants with different artworks, which really helped, but I also memorized the Chinese characters for most important game terms and became proficient at communicating game actions with gestures and pointing. In fact, even though the Chinese language barrier was a factor, the Chinese players picked up on the fact that I had a high level of knowledge of Magic's rules, and occasionally they consulted me when they had rules questions come up in their games. Even struggling to communicate with other players became a treasured memory for me. It was a sign that I was willing to work to be part of this community, and other people here were willing to work to accept me. To this day, whenever I'm having a hard time with the channel, that's one of the things that I think about, to give myself a little motivation. Knowing that there are people that I'll probably never meet that want me to keep doing what I'm doing is a powerful force, and I want to be the very best that I can for them. Now, a memory I have that's not as treasured was when Worldweight came out. I remember that the game store I played at had a display, and I saw the price of one specific card in that display going up by the equivalent of about $10 every week. Now, I imagine a lot of my viewers don't quite grasp why that was so significant. When I started playing Magic in my local area, the maximum price of a card was $20. Let me say that again. No Magic card from a currently in print set ever got above $20, or maybe in very rare cases you could see something go up to $25. And then in Shards of Alara, Wizards made one of the biggest changes that I don't think a lot of current players understand how significant it was. They introduced mythic rares. Now, having a new rarity that you would need to open multiple boxes of product to have even a 50-50 shot of opening a specific one gave stores a reason to raise this $20 cap. And I specifically remember seeing Elspeth selling at an unprecedented $40 a piece and thinking it was a crazy time to be alive. And then came Jace. Now, if you weren't playing back then, Jace the Mind Sculptor was good. Really good. Better than all, you might say. And while players were figuring that out, the price of one single card rose from 40, 50, 60, eventually all the way up to 100 plus. And it was pretty conclusively established that the correct number to play was 4. Actually, the correct number of Jace Bellerins to play was sometimes greater than 0, simply because of the fact that due to how the Planeswalker Uniqueness rule worked at the time, you could use that to deny your opponent a big Jace. Now, I opened one Jace the Mind Sculptor in a prize pack from an F&M, and I had to buy the other 3. Spending so much money all at once to continue playing Standard left a bad taste in my mouth. I had never had to do that before, but I still did it. The fact that I had 3 English Jaces and 1 Chinese one reminded me every week of the price that I paid to stay in the game, because I normally like to get all matching versions of the cards that I play, except this time that was impractically expensive. I developed a whole mental backstory about how Mind Sculptor Jace couldn't speak English, but all the other Jaces were still friends with him, paralleling my own experiences from when I got that card. Now, as bad as I felt buying in, that was still, and I know I'm going to lose some subscribers for saying this, my favorite Standard of all time. I'm the sort of person who likes deeply mastering one thing rather than gaining passing understanding of many things, and this metagame, with the highly skill-reliant mirror being the only matchup that required practice, will fit that qualification to a T. Now, another thing that happened when I was in college was that I started getting into more other formats besides Standard. Modern was invented around this time, and the component sets were all from my history of playing Magic. I almost never sold cards, so I already had most of what I needed in my collection already. Also, I started following the SCG circuit around this time, and I spent a lot of weekends watching their legacy streams. As I researched deck lists, I found that I actually wasn't that far away from being able to buy Merfolk, which was a tier 1 deck at the time. The monocolor nature of this deck meant that Wastelands and Force of Wills were the only expensive cards that it played, both of which were about $50 at the time. Better still, the collection I got from my cousin had a few Wastelands in it, since they weren't expensive when he gave it to me. So I was actually pretty close. From that point, I also started to scan eBay for deals on other Legacy staples. I eventually managed to complete a playset of all the revised dual lands for several $1,000s less than what it would cost at current prices. Legacy became my favorite format for its interesting gameplay, with all the decisions, even ones that would normally be irrelevant in other formats, having the potential to affect the outcome of the game. Now, after I graduated college, I went back to my hometown and I picked right back up where I left off. Pre-releases had changed to allow local stores to run them, so I usually showed up for those, but I was playing Magic every day and FNMs every week. Actually, it quickly turned into multiple FNMs every week. This is when Wizards of the Coast announced the FNM World Championship. Now, if you weren't playing back then, that was exactly what it sounded like. Every match point you got at every FNM you played in for about a 1-year period leading up to the event would be tabulated, and the top 100 point getters would receive a trip to the FNM World Championships at Gen Con that year. Now, at first you might think that to get in that club, you'd have to win a lot at FNMs, but it turns out that winning is not the most important thing here. A normal store FNM caps out at about 4 or 5 rounds, and the average normal player who's above average would get about 2 to 3 match wins. It was quickly figured out that this is one of those times where quantity trumped quality, and Wizards did not count on how degenerate Magic players could be. At this time in Magic history, each store was only allowed to have 2 FNMs per week. So if you had a 60% win rate, say, you'd be getting around 5 to 6 FNM match wins per week. But I had a secret weapon. I lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a city that had 5 stores that each held 2 FNMs every week. And the store owners staggered them. 2 stores held standard and modern FNMs at 4 and 7 p.m. A third store held a modern at 7 and a draft at 11 p.m. So an enterprising individual could play 11 rounds of FNM every week. I'm not sure if other cities just didn't have this sort of setup available, or if they did, but people just didn't want to spend 10 hours playing FNM every week for a year. But I can tell you that we did. Out of the 40 U.S. delegates to the FNM World Championships, over a quarter of them were from Fort Wayne, Indiana, including myself, and also both finalists, which definitely did not include myself. In fact, this was one of the worst showings that I had in a Magic tournament in my whole career. But this was what got me into Modern, at the time a brand new format that stores were trying out. And the response was very enthusiastic. Many of the players in my area liked it better than Standard, so a lot of the stores would run their FNMs as Standard and the other one of their FNMs as Modern. Now, I needed to make a Modern deck for the FNM World Championship race, but that was no problem at all because I already had most of the cards, so I only needed to get a few pickups to get whatever deck I wanted. And what deck did I want? Splinter Twin. This is the first deck that I tried out in the format, and still my favorite Modern deck of all time. And the thing I liked about it was the multi-dimensional game plan. Unlike a lot of combo decks that fold immediately if the opponent has any form of interaction, you actually had a legitimate plan B if things went sideways. The deck worked out pretty well for me too. There was a month-plus period where I was totally undefeated with this deck. Well, scrubbing out of the FNM World Championships was really disappointing. It was my first time at Gen Con though, which is a little bit unusual given that I'm a nerd who's lived in Indiana my whole life. The only thing I really connect with at Gen Con is Magic though, and I do a lot of Magic at other places. After the FNM World Championship tournament ended, I went right back to Magic, taking the chance to jump into a Legacy event there at Gen Con. Only thing is, that event required deck lists, which I did not know until right before I signed up. So I grabbed a sheet and I frantically started writing. I managed to finish it and hand it in just in time, hoping that I hadn't made any mistakes. Unfortunately, in round 2, a judge came up holding my deck list. The game loss that I got from that deck list problem wound up losing me that round, and I spent the rest of the day exploring outside the Magic Hall. I wanted to share that story because I know that it's happened to a lot of my viewers too. Unlike a lot of judges, I can relate. Now, my preparation for the FNM World Championship was probably my peak in terms of how much Magic I played. 4 rounds of Standard and Modern every week, and a 3-round draft after that was pretty draining, and it definitely crossed the line from fun hobby to something more like a chore or a job. But I still went for it, knowing that afterwards I would probably be dialing it back. Now, it happened, though, that shortly after I came back from that event, I was banned from my local game store over a disagreement that I had with another player who happened to be close to the owner. I know that's happened to some of my viewers too. Unlike a lot of judges, I can relate. Now, I know for a lot of people, grinding so hard to make a tournament only to scrub out and then follow it up with something like that would be a sign that maybe it's time to take a break. I even left out the part about how my closest friend that I played with ended up getting out of the game at this time over a yet more traumatic event for him. It was actually really bad. But I still played every week. After all, there were 5 game stores in Fort Wayne, and I was only banned from one of them. I distinctly remember thinking at the time, this is it. I guess I'll be a Magic player forever. If I'm not quitting now, I can't imagine what will happen that will make me ever quit. And what I didn't know was that I had hit peak Magic. From this point on, my commitment to the game would only decline. It started with drafting. I guess I liked it okay, but I only got into it because it was necessary, either to avoid walking 3 miles to play or to accumulate the most number of points at F&M. Besides, I was banned from the store that had drafts at F&M anyway. Earlier that year, WotC had also announced that organizers could not hold drafts at pre-releases. While intended to curb the practice of people entering drafts just to drop and get the booster packs, all it did for me was get me to stop going to pre-releases, since I wasn't really into sealed. I was happy to return to playing Standard and Modern in town and Legacy whenever SCG was in my area. At this time, Modern was really taking off. It outpaced Standard in terms of popularity within a couple of years. Those who watched my video on my origin story might recall that this is around the time that I certified as a judge. And also, the thing that finally pushed me into doing so was that I could have something to do on day 1 of SCG events. See, originally the SCG Tour had a Standard event on Saturday and a Legacy event on Sunday. Now, I was interested enough in Legacy to want to play that, but I wasn't enthusiastic about putting my money on the line for Standard. Honestly, it took a while for me to go in on Legacy, but then I did. I was a pretty good player, generally hitting top 32 in events that I played, with a handful of top 16s. What did I play in Legacy? My favorite Legacy deck was the same as my favorite Standard deck, Stoneblade. I actually really liked the version that splashed green and black for Deathrite Shaman, and I actually had one build of this deck where I added 2 Zealous Persecutions in the main, which I later saw some other players had copied. I was definitely the only person who was playing Zealous P at the time, so there's no doubt that they got that one from me, which was a big time ego boost. Now, as a judge, I could go to an open with friends, judge on Saturday, and play on Sunday. It was a great setup. A lot of the time, I would sign up to judge both days, and if I got accepted on Sunday, then I wouldn't have the ability to play, but I would be making money, and I liked judging too. But then I got a problem. As I got more established in the judge community, and especially after I made level 2, I started getting accepted to judge both days pretty much all the time. I gradually started getting to the point where I had to strategically not apply to Sunday because I wanted to be able to play. But I didn't like doing that because my expected value is a lot higher as a judge than as a player. And then SCG did something that helped me out. They restructured their Open Series. Now, they had previously introduced Modern to the tour, such that it wasn't always Standard Saturday and Legacy Sunday. But at the end of 2015, they announced that the Saturday event would be the only one that paid out in cash. The Sunday event would have a lot lower prize purse and pay out only in store credit. Now, like most Legacy players, I had very limited use for additional Magic cards, as well as the sleeves, playmats, and other stuff that SCG had on offer. So to me, this was fundamentally equivalent to just not playing for a prize at all. I get why they did it. I assume Legacy was much less profitable than the alternatives, and the format wasn't really growing anymore, meaning that Legacy cards were becoming harder to sell. I can't be upset that the business made the decision that made the most financial sense, even if that decision did drop the number of my favorite tournaments from once or twice a quarter to a couple of times per year. I still followed the format and I liked the gameplay, but without playing, my interest naturally waned. Over the next couple of years, I just played Modern and Standard and store events. Pretty much any event that I would have to travel to judge, I would just judge. Modern had by this time established itself as the much more popular format in my area, and eventually all the stores offered Modern F&Ms alongside or even instead of Standard. One thing that was still Standard, though, was Game Day. This was the Standard format event that Wizards held to celebrate the release of a new set. There was a free promo that you got just for playing, and then another promo that you got if you made top 8, and then the winner would get a playmat that looked sort of like this. Pretty cool, right? I've been using this playmat pretty much exclusively ever since I won it, and it's not because I like it, it's actually like one of the ugliest playmats that I own, but I was using it at a game day because I left my other playmat that I usually use at home, and I accidentally had my pen slide off my life pad when I was using it, something that had never happened before or since. And so as a penance, I decided that I would keep using this game day playmat until it wore out, and it's still going strong, sort of. I did eventually start swapping it out when I got the official Judging for the Win playmats made, though. Now, I played in the very first game day way back in 2007, and most of the rest of them all the way up to the time in the story that we're at. Actually, game day was one of my favorite events, and I looked forward to it more than even the pre-release. I would block out my whole weekend and go to as many as I could, primarily driven by wanting to collect a full playset of the top 8 promos, some of which proved relatively valuable. The playmats, too, occasionally sold for shocking amounts of money. I recall selling an M14 Chandra playmat for around $50 and thinking I got an insane deal until I looked it up on eBay and I couldn't find one out there for less than $75. Now, being a fairly competitive player, it usually wasn't a problem for me to profit from these events, but my store hopping did rub some people the wrong way, since I was sometimes knocking regulars of stores I otherwise never played in out of the top 8 or playmat contention. Others felt like it was wrong for me to go for the playmats when I had no intention of doing anything with them other than selling, likening me to a scalper. And to be fair, my competitive behavior certainly did cross the realm of toxicity at some of these events, especially during some game days at stores that had much more casual atmospheres than the store that I usually played at. For my part, I resented people telling me that I was enjoying the game wrong and making me, and competitive players in general, out to be a villain. Unfortunately, Wizards of the Coast came to the rescue by discontinuing game day after Hour of Devastation in 2017. And with that, I was done with Standard. Since all the stores around me had modern offerings for their FNMs, I had no intention of playing RCQs, or PPTQs as they were known at the time. There was no reason for me to have a Standard deck anymore, so I just stopped getting Standard cards. Now, that actually lined up pretty well with my values anyway. See, in my opinion, right about this point is where Magic jumped the shark. Basically, every decision that they'd made recently showed that Wizards of the Coast was no longer committing to making the best game they could with collectible aspects. Now they were focused on making the best collectible they could that would still pass as a game. And that is not what I wanted. Everything I liked about Magic was related to it being a game, not a collectible. I still liked playing that game, but I wasn't interested in keeping up with it anymore. A couple of years later, Wizards introduced Pioneer. Now, unlike Modern, I had not been playing for all the sets of that. I missed about 2 years, like I just said. As a result of rampant power creep, every single one of the top tier decks required multiple cards from those 2 years. I've never been anywhere close to owning a Pioneer deck, and I've never played a single game of Pioneer. Then, COVID hit. And for several months, I didn't play a single game of Magic, at all. Truth be told, it wasn't too big of a change for me. By this point, it had already progressed to sporadic attendance at FNM, so going cold turkey wasn't too big of a shock. During the pandemic, Wizards dropped Modern Horizons 2, the most power-crept set in Magic history. All of the existing Modern decks were invalidated and replaced with a new slate of decks built around cards from this set. And after the lockdown was lifted, I unloaded a few of my Judge foils to get a playset of Ragvans and a bunch of Elementals, and then I bought back into the format. A few months later, Lord of the Rings showed up, and now every Modern deck required a playset of either the One Ring or Orcish Bowmaster. And that was it. Wizards had made it clear that there would be no format of Magic that would be playable without continual financial investment. Magic was no longer for me. And so that's the story of how a 20-year veteran who once structured his life around playing as many FNMs as possible, who could never imagine how he would quit, now only plays once a month in a kitchen table game of EDH with 3 friends where everyone proxies 100% of their decks. I'm going to be honest with you, I hate this place, this game, this collectible, this hobby, whatever you want to call it. I feel like that scene in The Matrix where Agent Smith is talking about how badly he wants to escape, to be free. If I could snap my fingers and trade my experience in Magic the Gathering for an equivalent amount of knowledge and background in something else, anything else, I would do it. Sight unseen. Feels awful losing everything that I used to love about Magic piece by piece. This game, once a pillar that I used to center myself in a foreign land, now seems completely unrecognizable to me. I had a friend ask if I wanted to go to the Tarkir pre-release with him recently. I said no. It wasn't because I was busy or broke or needed to recharge by myself. It's because I didn't want to spend my whole Saturday playing Magic. I'm sorry, Chris. There's one reason that I'm still here, and it's because right now I'm a world-recognized expert in this field with thousands of fans. And giving that up is hard. I want you all to think about something for me. When's the last time someone appreciated something that you did? What about someone who was not a coworker or a family member, someone who's in some way relying on your help? How many days ago was it? Or maybe I should be asking about months, years? I know what the answer would be for me if you discount all the times it was about judging for the win. Maybe some of my viewers can relate. So yeah, when I'm out here wasting my time researching how Deadpool works with some other nonsense magic card, I'm not doing it because I like it, I'm not doing it because I'm curious, I'm doing it because someone out there wants to know and I can help them. Knowing there are people out there that are benefiting from my work is what keeps me going. And if I can use my skills to make the world a better place for those people, then that's enough of a reward for me. Now, I know that was a little heavy, and I like to keep things upbeat on this channel, so I want everyone to know it's not all doom and gloom. You know, when I was younger, I used to be really into Thomas the Tank Engine. I had his merch, watched his show on TV all the time, even cosplayed as the title character. Now, I'm not really as big of a fan. I couldn't even tell you the last time that I interacted with the franchise at all, but even though my life would probably be objectively better if I could have spent the time I put into Thomas into something like, learning a foreign language, I don't regret doing it. I was doing what I wanted at the time, and that's all that matters. Besides, it's not like the time that I spent playing Magic was wasted. As an adult, nearly all of the friends that I have are people that I met through the game, either directly or indirectly. The strategy, resource management, and decision-making skills I learned from playing, and the leadership, communication, and social skills I learned from judging have had profound impacts on all areas of my life. Just because me and the game have grown apart, that doesn't invalidate any of the good times I had, nor should it diminish the enjoyment other people can gain from their own experiences. Who knows, maybe one day I'll pick it back up again and I'll fall back in love. But that's all I have for you today. How did I do? Thank you again to all of my lovely supporters on Patreon. Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling. But until then, I hope you have a great day.